Hey, we even got a pretty little sign, too, along with the music. Hi, I'm Judy Finari, and this is The Chronic Rift. Misunderstood mound of reusable body parts, or the incarnation of evil himself? No, I'm not talking about Keith, but rather the Frankenstein monster. But, sometimes you can't tell who is who. Is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley the first science fiction novel? Stay tuned and you might find out. The news from overseas is that John Nathan Turner, the producer for Doctor Who, has resigned from the BBC. No reasons at all were given. Vicious rumors are being spread that Cinema Verity, a production company, is interested in the series. This company was founded and is headed by Verity Lampert, who was the original producer of the series 27 years ago. Last week, we had the distinct pleasure of having that dreamboat, Bob Greenberger, on our show. And he squashed a rumor for us about Will Wheaton, who plays Wesley Crusher on The Next Generation. Although Wheaton is dissatisfied about the way his character is being developed on the show, he is returning. And so is Patrick Stewart. Wheaton will only be in 8 of the 26 episodes that are scheduled to be aired this year. What I really want to know, actually I really only want to know it because my producer told me to want to know it, is when is the original Star Trek going to be put in a regular time slot on WPIX Channel 11, rather than being used as a filler after ball games? Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss, those crazy Dragon Last writers, are at it again with a new series. The second volume of the Deathgate Cycle, entitled Elven Star, is due out this October by Bantam Books, costing $19.95. Ooh, if I had said 95, you would not have bought it. The first volume, Dragon Wing, came out late last year. This week's memorable moment comes from David Great. And David writes, "Yo, you guys, I like the idea of your show. It sounds absolutely fascinating. This is my contribution for a memorable moment. It's from the movie The Bride, starring Sting. Sincerely, David R. Great. And remember, if you have a memorable moment or a not so memorable one, please contact us here at The Rift."
No, ladies.
I never saw that one, did you?
She's gone.
Now here's a man who is not at a loss for words, although I'd wish he'd cut out the big SAT ones once in a while. Here's Keith DeCandido and his own comic art commentary. Hi, Keith.
Hi, Judy. Thank you very much, even if you don't like my vocabulary. Hi, I'm Keith DeCandido, critic for the Comics Journal. This is Comic Art Commentary. You give me 5 minutes, I'll give you the world. Well, some of the world. Well, a small portion of the world. At least, insignificant, never mind. Revolutionary Comics has been in legal hassles from the very moment that they began Rock and Roll Comics, a series of unauthorized biographies of rock and roll stars. They've had hassles from Guns N' Roses management in the past, and their latest are with New Kids on the Block. New Kids and their merchandisers, the San Francisco-based company Winterland, sued Revolutionary and its editor, Todd Lauren, for portraying New Kids and using their logo. According to an uncredited front-page story in the Comics Buyer's Guide, which it turns out was lifted verbatim from a Revolutionary press release, a settlement was reached on August 23rd, and New Kids in Winterland dropped the charges, saying that they, quote, recognized and acknowledged their, revolutionaries, right to publish biographical material in comic book form as protected by the First Amendment, unquote. The story also stated Lauren's intention to publish a New Kids on the Block hate book in November, claiming that the readers intensely disliked New Kids and were angry that they had disgraced the cover of rock and roll comics. Lauren told me over the phone that New Kids in Winterland were stalling and hadn't signed the agreement because he publicized it in CBG. He also told me that the stipulation of the agreement was only that they couldn't use New Kids' logo, and they recognized revolutionaries' right to publish unauthorized bios. However, the next week, CBG and Winterland themselves tell a different story. The agreement stated that Revolutionary cannot make any further use of New Kids' service marks, trademarks, names, and logos. Winterland has threatened to renew legal action against Revolutionary, but their legal representative, Michael Krasner, told me that that wasn't very likely. A settlement, again, should be reached very soon. Krasner did not give any judgment as to the hate book that's proposed for November, as he doesn't want to pass judgment on anything that hasn't come out yet. However, one can safely assume that given Lauren's predilection for disregarding certain copyright laws, this ain't over yet. CBG co-editor Don Thompson told me he was absolutely furious at Lauren's misrepresentations. He said he's never had anyone lie about a court settlement to him before. Of course, CBG did print the press release without any investigation, so they sort of dug their own graves on this. Neither Todd Lauren nor Revolutionary Comics are known for their exalted standards. They should have checked up on this. This kind of sloppy journalism really doesn't do anybody any kind of good. Winterland, by the way, plans no action against CBG, as they simply printed what they were sent. This week's comic in review is Kings in Disguise by James Vance and Dan Burr. It started out as a one-act play written by Vance about hobos during the Depression. They are the Kings in Disguise. Vance readapted it into a 6-issue limited series that was published last year by Kitchen Sink Press. The play comprises most of the second issue. It has now been released as a graphic novel. The story follows Freddie Block, a motherless child who loses first his father and then his brother and is stuck on his own. He goes in search to find his father, hopefully in Detroit. He meets numerous hobos and winds up traveling with one across the country. His name is Sammy, and he fancies himself the King of Spain. And in many ways, he is the Jim to Freddie's Huck. And the journey is very similar to the one Mark Twain did in Huckleberry Finn, only for a different time period. Vance and Burr in many ways conjure up a Woody Guthrie song with this work. Hobo's Lullaby and I Ain't Got No Home particularly spring to mind upon reading it. They capture the feel of the era very nicely. The life of the hobos, the anti-communist feeling amongst all but the most raving of socialists, the thick dividing lines between the police and the upper crust, who were the establishment, and the labor, the poor, and the hobos, who were the unclean outsiders. Burr's art is very reminiscent of the underground cartoonist Robert Crumb, but it is much cleaner and very evocative. It's perfect for the story. The graphic novel also includes a 10-page story that was originally in Dark Horse Presents number 42, also by Vance and Burr. Kings in Disguise is available from Kitchen Sink Press, 6 issues, 28 pages an issue, $2 an issue, although the price may be a little higher now. The graphic novel is 180 pages, $14.95 in paperback, $25 for a hardcover that is signed by the writer and artist, and is available both at comic specialty shops and directly by mail from the publisher. That's it for Comic Art Commentary this week. Next week, I will be taking a look at a genuine, good old-fashioned Marvel comic, The New Warriors.
Not a Marvel comic.
Yes, a Marvel comic.
Under $1?
Well, it costs $1. Nothing costs under $1 anymore.
Okay.
There is not a comic book, I don't think, being published. There may be a couple that are still 75 cents, but most of them are all $1 now. Sorry.
Good enough.
Okay. So, who was the first science fiction author anyway?
Wasn't me.
No. Some say the Russian author Yevgeny Zamyatin, whose 1920 dystopian tale We inspired both Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984, was the first. However, before Zamyatin, there was H.G. Wells, the most popular candidate, who wrote such tales as The Time Machine in the 1880s. 1890s. In the 1880s was a whole mess of socialist utopias, written by, among others, Edward Bellamy, author of Looking Backward, William Morris, the writer of News from Nowhere, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who wrote Herland. 60 years before that, however, there was a young British woman who wrote a number of pioneering SF works. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, the author of The Last Man, a tale of 21st century Earth where humanity is wiped out by plague, The Mortal Immortal, the sad story of a man cursed with immortality, and her first and most famous novel, Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. Mary Shelley was the daughter of two of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment, William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft. She was paramour and later wife to romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, and it was due to her efforts as an editor that Shelley's work enjoys the popularity it still has today. And she was close friends with such literary figures as Lord Byron and Leigh Hunt. And she was a very prolific writer and editor. Tonight we'll be discussing Frankenstein as a pioneer of modern science fiction, not the cinematic tomfoolery that has inundated the popular conscience this century, but the original story, published in 1818 and revised and republished in 1831. With Judy and I to discuss this great work are Don Reiman, the editor of Shelley and His Circle at the Carl H. Pforzheimer Collection of the New York Public Library, Greg Cox, an editor at William Morrow Books and author of a number of SF short stories and 2 forthcoming books, and Emily Sunstein, author of Mary Shelley, Romance in Reality, the most comprehensive biography on the author to date. It was Brian Aldiss who first officially proposed the idea of Frankenstein as the first science fiction novel. Greg, you're very familiar with what he's done. What were Aldiss's arguments, and how do you feel about them? How do you agree?
Well, I think trying to find the first of anything is kind of an arbitrary game. We're just like trying to find the missing link. You know, it was actually a long process of evolution. Frankenstein is more like what we think of as modern science fiction than, say, you know, Utopia by Sir Thomas More or something, and less so than probably H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. But the reason I think all of us are pinned on it, if you have to find a starting point, Frankenstein is as good as any, is sort of the whole attitude. For all that it has, you know, one big clopping foot in the horror tradition here. When Victor Frankenstein, who is a scientist, goes down to make the monster, he does it through science. He doesn't, you know, make a pact with the devil. He doesn't, you know, wave a wand. And beyond that, once the monster is created, once again, you know, you can't dispel it by an exorcism or by, you know, holy water or by lifting the curse. It's, to use a phrase, you know, much beloved of science fiction writers, Mary Shelley sort of took the idea of an artificial man and extrapolated from there. It's all very natural. The monster is not killed by a lightning bolt from God at the end. When Victor Frankenstein decides not to make a female monster to go along with the original one, is because he sits down and figures out the logical scientific consequences. My God, 2 monsters, they'll breed, they'll overrun the Earth, we'll have an invasion of giant monsters, which sounds, in fact, like a science fiction plot. You know, so it's basically a sort of attitude, sort of, you know, for all that you've got murdered brides and creepy old, you know, houses and estates and things, and it's the sort of attitude of we're going to forget curses, we're going to forget the whole sort of, you know, religious background here. It's going to be about, you know, science and knowledge, and indeed, the monster itself is not even a symbol so much, because a good chunk of the novel is told from the point of view of the monster and is concerned with his psychology. It's much more sort of practical and scientific and logical.
Emily, you spent a large portion of time with Mary Shelley. How much was she involved with the science of the time, as it were?
Well, she had what I'd call an educated layman's acquaintance with science. She read, there were fairly popular books, at least for people of her intellectual caliber around, and there were ideas floating around. She was certainly not a student of science, but she knew what was going on, generally speaking. And one of the books she read, for instance, just before she had the dream that engendered the novel, was a report on German science by Madame de Stael, which mentioned the fact that in a particular university in Germany, a young scientist was working on the principle of life, and it was starting to experiment with the principles of life and death. So that was kind of common knowledge in the intelligentsia, that level of knowledge of science.
And this was also coming right on the heels of the Enlightenment. This was, you know, when the idea of science is something that was not, it's still in the domain of alchemists or magicians or something. It was something concrete, and there was a lot of thought that people wanted to find out why things work. They weren't just, there was less of a willingness to accept that, you know, it's God's will or something like that.
You had to test it.
Yes, you had to prove to yourself that it exists.
But the interesting thing is Frankenstein is such an anti-Enlightenment novel. It is a novel about, and I guess the tradition is followed in this direction, that when someone tries to go beyond the bounds of the human community, they face destruction for themselves and for other people. And of course, the plot is set up in a way where Victor Frankenstein has to isolate himself from this very warm community that he grew up in order to pursue this dream of creating life, and then he has his whole community destroyed as a result of his experiments. And there are many people, of course, who feel that Mary Shelley was warning Shelley not to go beyond the bounds of common knowledge and to be more conventional. I don't think that that is true and at the time it was written, and yet there is this little subconscious nudging, perhaps. Certainly many things in Victor Frankenstein's background and so on are taken from Shelley's.
Could it be not just a warning to Shelley, but to the rest of the new scientists? You know, this is what could happen if you tamper.
Definitely, but I don't think that she was worried so much about the science. I think the reason it is a science fiction novel is that the man is in charge of the world. I mean, in the theological terms of recent time, they say God is dead, man comes of age. Man has to take responsibility for what he does, whether he's deforesting or making new life. And in this sense, I think that certainly she is setting a warning that man, whatever he does as in the scientific line, has to take responsibility for it and follow through at the moral level.
You just can't be haphazard about it.
Right,
I think that's what Victor is guilty of. He creates the monster, and the first thing he does after it's completed is run away from it and abandons it.
You could argue that that's his major fatal mistake, is not creating the monster so much in the first place. I think if the message was just going to be a moral allegory, don't meddle with things if man must live alone, you wouldn't have gotten all those huge chunks told from the point of view of the monster.
Yeah, but back up, because the fact is that he meant to make the monster beautiful, and somehow it was not within his capacity to do so. When he looked, it was only when it came to life that he saw that it was horrible. And again, in the same book by Madame de Staël, she points out that when you see something as ugly, you automatically think it's evil. I mean, it's it's human instinct.
Everybody
and
reacts that way to the monster.
It's not his fault that he runs away. It's intrinsic in the situation that he's inadvertently set up, which makes it much more interesting as a tragedy.
But isn't, in essence, this is his son? He created it in a sense, and he's turning away from it because it's like, say, if like a child's born with a birth defect, it's kind of like, I see it as that,
Well, I think it was supposed to be much worse than that. It's supposed to be, totally abnormal in every sense, in size and hideousness, and in fearsomeness.
The thing about the moral of the story, however, goes beyond the Victor Frankenstein thing. It goes to the whole narration with Walton. Because the sea captain who meets Victor Frankenstein hears his story and he learns from his error to turn back from his attempt to find the North Pole, which was threatening death to his crew, and he goes back to his sister in England, to whom he's been writing these letters, and agrees to live among the human community. And this pattern is a first also in well, I don't know if it's really first, but it's one of the earliest novels that uses this pattern of a secret sharer, of someone who identifies with another character, as you have it in Moby Dick with Ishmael and Ahab, and Melville read Frankenstein 2 years before he wrote Moby Dick, so this is probably not an accident. You have it in Conrad's Heart of Darkness with Kurtz and Marlowe, where someone is going into the African jungle and to try to identify someone who is gone beyond human limits and learns to turn back, and so on. And Great Gatsby, Death of a Salesman, all these works use this technique of showing someone going beyond the limits. That's the only way in a world without rules you can tell how far you can go without failing.
But even again, excuse me, the last thing that Victor Frankenstein says, after he himself has warned Walton, he says, Walton, forgo any ambition, even the innocent, apparently innocent ambition for science, knowledge in science, and so forth and so forth. And then he says, why do I say this? I have failed, another may succeed.
And he almost talks the crew into going.
And it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
So that's what's so great. I think one of the great things about the novel, that yes, it's that, but she's also saying without, I think, without the ambition for knowledge and so on, humankind is stuck in the mud, so to speak.
But you can't. But the point is,
And you don't even know if the monster's really dead.
No, you don't.
No, the ending leaves you hanging. It's like what's, and I kind of had a problem with that.
Well, actually, if the ending, if the influence helps, if the book was purely anti-science, you know, it wouldn't be science fiction. You could, you know, throw Brian also out the window, since the mad, you know, most of the thrust of science fiction is, in fact, we're going to, like, you know, go boldly where no man has gone before, and there's a dystopian strain running through it, you know, Fahrenheit 451. But there's sort of this ambivalence in science fiction of, well, this is be fun, but it's going to be spooky and there are going to be monsters too, which is where, you know.
Speaking of monsters, I've dealt with this book in the teaching, in the classroom, and the usual cover that I've seen students have, the green monster with the lightning bolts, and you know, the old-time movies, and they read the book and they're sorely disappointed about what the monster looks like. Where did they get this bug-eyed? Where did that come from?
Boris Karloff.
Yeah, right.
It came from the 1931 movie.
Where did they get it from?
But I don't know what
That's the weird part. It has no basis, really, on anything that she describes in the novel.
You'll have to ask the people that wrote that movie.
Yeah.
What do you think about that representation of the Frankenstein monster?
I think it's out of the spirit of the book. I think he should be hideous in the way that she makes him hideous. Bits and pieces of human
color.
flesh.
They couldn't show the yellow skin.
I think that there were probably budget constraints might have had a lot.
Actually, I understand that the whole business about him being green is actually a mistake. Yes, they used green makeup on the set, but that was simply so it would look white, deathly white, and pale and corpse-light and black and white. Unfortunately, some color stills got out, and, you know, the monster was not meant to be green. He was meant to be deathly, you know, Night of the Living Dead looking.
But you see that cover on a book, and he's green, and he's, and with the big black suit, Herman Munster type.
It's a shame because he doesn't even talk, you know, in the book. Well, that's half the drama.
He is so eloquent.
reaction.
Yes, I was just about to say
Incredible eloquence. That's my favorite part of the book, is the 10th through 16th chapters where he's giving the narration. It's a wonderful story of somebody. I mean, this is somebody who's just come into the world, but he's full grown. He's obviously got a quick mind because he learns language very quickly. And, you know, just the whole joy of him, you know, discovering things, discovering the moon, discovering the dual nature of fire. You know, this was the child of nature that the poet William Wordsworth always aspired to be. You know, and Mary Shelley had read Wordsworth. And Coleridge and all of them, first wave of the Romantics. You know, and it was really wonderful. And then, you know, especially after the build-up you've gotten from Victor's narration that this was a fiend, this was a devil, this was a demon, and you get this pleading, eloquent creature who's, you know, he just wants to be loved. You know, he does, you know.
And you see none of that in the early movies. And they try to do that in the Bride, but
Young Frankenstein approaches it, I think.
To be fair, they put the business with the blind man into the Karloff, into the Bride of Frankenstein, the business with the old blind man and everything is in there.
Yeah.
And the monster is semi-sympathetic in, you know, the old at least the first couple of Karloff films, but they killed all his good lines, yes, but the creature is meant to be semi-vulnerable, you know.
They only had an hour and a half of the movie, didn't they?
Well, I think we all ought to get together and produce a Frankenstein movie the way Mary Shelley wrote it. It's never been done.
A great movie.
Starting with a ship stuck in the ice, right, and this dog sled coming along with Frankenstein, and ending with a monster running off into the distance.
Would you think, though, that anybody would see it, though?
Well, it would have to be on public television on 6
no,
hours.
it'd be a sensation.
Well, it's a short enough novel, you could probably do it. And you know, the scenes in Mont Blanc, I mean, those are really visual. The whole thing when he's sailing down the Arve, before he meets the monster, he actually talks to the monster.
Yeah, but if you don't have Sting selling the movie, or you don't have Gene Wilder making it into a comedy, if you've got the real true.
You've got enough atrocities in that book to keep it going, you know. You've got a murdered kid. You've got, you know,
But I'm trying to say, in terms of the way science, Hollywood science fiction, you know, I would watch. I'd love to help make it, but will it sell, Monty?
Frankenstein seems to sell. I mean, you know.
There was a recent comic adaptation of it. There was an adaptation specifically of the novel. They were talking about, you know, the classic something, the classic, I don't remember what
there's been at least 4 movies about Mary Shelley in the last 2 years or so.
Well,
all of them terrible.
Awful.
But yeah, and one more coming up this fall, I think. But yeah,
The
movie version of Frankenstein Unbound.
that's been taken off. We found also from Bob Greenberger, when we found out about Wesley Crusher, he said that it's not on 20th Century Fox's list right now. They're not, and it's too bad. Raul Julia is supposed to play Victor, which is an interesting bit of casting, although he's a little old.
Quite a bit.
Victor's really something people don't realize. Victor Frankenstein was only about 21 years old.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was only, he just started college when he did this. And
It's typical of scientists. Look, didn't Einstein develop his, with 21 or early 20s or something?
But he didn't have to go out and rob graves.
No. If we want to debunk movie myths, Dr. Frankenstein wasn't even out of college yet. He wouldn't have a degree. Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't. He wasn't Baron. Well, he was a Baron's son, so I guess
No, he wasn't.
He didn't get a patent.
Well, my father was somebody important.
He was a syndic of the Geneva Republic.
Right. So he was important enough, and that was.
He was a Republican.
We didn't have to have big degrees in those days to do big things.
One thing you mentioned before about the comparison with Shelley, and I was just thinking when I mentioned the trip down the Arve, the same summer that Frankenstein was inspired, it was when Percy and Mary Shelley and Lord Byron and Byron's physician were all in Switzerland. The inspiration for that same summer that she started working on the novel, Percy Shelley wrote Mont Blanc. And there's a lot of similarities there. There's a trip down the Arve, and it's interesting because Mont Blanc proposes the idea of a great power in the mountain. Shelley was really big on that. And in many ways, Frankenstein was a response to that, I think. Do you agree with this?
James Rieger, in his edition of the Frankenstein, compares the 1831 text, which Mary Shelley revised after Shelley's death, with the 1818 text that she originally published. And he says there are 3 scenes in the later version in which she purposely takes almost the language from Mont Blanc and incorporates it in the novel. So I don't think it was really made as an answer to Mont Blanc. Mont Blanc is about the, actually is a precondition for Frankenstein in the sense that it talks about the amorality of nature. Power dwells apart in his tranquility, remote and inaccessible, and only man has to add the moral dimension to the world. As in Shelley's poem, there is this question at the end of the poem: what were this blankness if it weren't for man's mind that adds to it? I mean, I'm not quoting obviously, but the idea is that man produces something that isn't in this natural world of power.
Well, I hate to cut you all off. This has been really wonderful. It really has. I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. But time has caught up with us. And
time always does, no matter what.
That's it for tonight. Until next week, when we talk about the works of Robert A. Heinlein, I've been really sick tonight, and I want some aspirin.
Aspen? You're going to Aspen and didn't tell me?
No, silly boy, aspirin, the miracle drug.
Oh. No.
Good night.
This is the part where we all sit around and talk amongst ourselves and make fun of ourselves.